Jacob and Lydia.
L-I or L-Y?
Lydia.
And her maiden name?
Glaceman.
G-L-A?
Yep. Glaesman.
G-L-A-E-S-M-A-N?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Rosina's parents' names?
Yep. Godlebnitsky and Katharina Hyde.
Gottlieb is G-O-T-T-L-I-E-B.
Yep.
And what was the other name?
Katharina Hyde.
K-A-T-H-E-R-I.
N-A.
H-I or H-Y?
I.
D-E? H-I-D-E? Hyde?
Hyde is H-E-Y-D.
H-E-Y-D. Okay. Yeah, several spellings of that. Okay, and then Lydia Glassman. So Donna, what was your maiden name?
Hoffman.
2 F's or 1?
F-F-M-A-N.
F-F-M-A-N. And Donna's parents were?
Gottlieb J. Initials usually were G.J. He went by that. G.J. That's Hoffman. And my mom was Ernestine Meyer.
Ernestine.
M-A-I-E-R.
Okay. And Gottlieb, I-E-B? Gottlieb, G-O-T-T.
T-T-L-I-E-B.
Okay.
Good.
Gottlieb's parents.
Was John and Carolina. Walz was her maiden name. W-A-L-Z.
Oops, no T. W-A-L-Z. Okay, and that... John was a Hoffman. This is
Yes.
where I always get it mixed up.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can see it's easy. Yeah, John and Carolina.
Okay.
And her maiden name was Walz.
All right.
Further back than that, I don't know.
Okay. And so then we would go to Ernestine's parents. Do you?
And her dad was John Meyer. And her mother was Catherine. She passed away at a very young age. So John married Catherine's sister, which was Elizabeth. My mom and my aunt were 1 and 2 years old when Catherine passed away.
She had appendicitis.
A ruptured appendix, and she died. And left a 1 and 2 year old child.
Oh my
children.
gosh.
And of course, Grandpa, how was he going to take care of him? So he married the next sister. And then after that, they had 1 son with the stepmom, you know. And John Meyer's father was Johannes, J-O-H-A-N-N-A-S. And his wife was Sarah,
With an H or without?
S-A-R-A-H, I believe. And wasn't she, what maiden name was that, a Rimford? Is that where the Rimfords
I
come
believe
in?
it was.
Rimford, R-E-M-P-F-E-R-T.
R-E-M.
Positive on that.
P-F-E-R-T. I've never heard
I
that name
believe so,
before.
yeah.
Rimford.
Because I know
That used to
that's,
be very popular in the Allendale area.
so, yeah.
Okay, yeah, see my grandpa Caseman married a shilling from
Okay.
South Dakota, and they wondered how he got so far away from home to find a wife.
Were
Yeah.
they coupled together?
They were coupled, maybe.
I have
Brought
no
together?
idea what that means. I've never heard that before.
Well, we haven't
Say
never-
it again.
Coupled. K-O-U-P-L-E-D.
Here's how that worked. You know, in the early days, they had all these kids. Okay, I got an extra son, and you got an extra daughter.
Well, they
and
had
you
a
married
dozen
them.
kids, so.
You know, there was no matchmaking like, you know.
They
I
didn't get
started-
around to see each
You know,
other.
I started
So,
dating her, and then
oh yeah, this farmer's got a bunch
Yeah.
of girls. We're
That's
gonna
how
go
they
over
did
once
that.
and find this guy a wife. So you drive over. Yeah, this lady would make a good wife for him, and that's okay. That's it.
And they were okay with
And
that?
it would
They had
stand
to
to
be.
imagine how that would have. Well, I
They
mean,
had
some of
to
those
be.
marriages were not made in heaven. I can say that.
anyway, my grandma Nitschke come from Long Lake. That's where the Hyde settled in, and that was that deal there. Yeah, that guy had an extra daughter, so he brought her up
So,
here, and you
well,
marry this guy.
Grandpa Nitschke, they hauled him down there, and he picked one out.
No, he didn't pick them.
I thought he did. No?
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
what were the requirements? Did they go by looks or did they go by?
Probably a big straw one, so
Usually
she could
back
stack
in those
the
early
haystacks
days, they
good.
wanted a big, heavy-set woman that was strong so she could stack hay.
Because she was a good worker.
Yeah, and going
So
up
there
on
it
top
goes.
of that haystack, you know, and pack that hay in. My grandpa Nitschke, he was so dang particular with that hay stacking that was unreal.
Oh, you better watch. This is going to be recorded.
Well, anyway, there was this widow lady in Lair that had a little girl and she was looking for a husband. So they took him up to meet her. This guy that knew of her from Ashley, and then they met and things looked promising, and then on the way home he was riding with this other guy and he said, you know, I think she's kind of interested in me. I think this is gonna work. You know, they were, and they got married, you know, brought
Well,
them together and
And you know, it was more because of work, wasn't it? I mean, or sort of like,
Well, you needed a wife,
You-
and if you had
right.
children, or if you didn't, you know, not all guys were appealing. So a lot of times, okay, he needs a wife, and I mean, it worked out sometimes. I mean, some were very good, and then there were some where it wasn't so good.
so how important was it that each farm family or each farmstead grew or raised their own food?
it was very important.
It was a necessity for them to have that to
They,
survive.
both my grandparents' sets, they basically survived on geese and goats because they were very easy to raise. Did not cost a lot of money to have either one of those around. So that back in those early days was very important, this part of the country here.
Did you, did both of you grow up on farms near here?
Yes.
This would be your family farm here, and then you
I
grew
live
up,
22 miles from here
okay.
to the west, or
Wow.
east actually, yeah.
And did you guys garden growing up?
Oh,
Like,
yes.
did your parents garden?
Yes.
Big, small? Can you tell me a little bit about how that all panned out and who did the work?
Large garden, and then you had to have what they call in German a Bestand, and you would go out to the field, and that's where you would plant your pumpkins and your potatoes and your watermelon and your corn, because your regular
Okay,
garden.
so we were talking about gardening. Oh, you said you had a big garden called
A Bestand.
and in there you had what?
That
And then
was
you were going to.
pumpkins and watermelon and corn, potatoes.
Extra potatoes
Yes.
was very
Basically,
important.
yeah. You didn't have the potatoes in your little garden near the farm. This had to be out in the field because you had more space and more room. And back then you planted potatoes to last you from one year to the next year when you had garden again. So of course you planted a lot of potatoes. Some people would say it's a potato field, but it was called a Bestand. I remember that well because then we'd have to go out and Ma would say, okay, it was a day where it was maybe a little rainy or something. Okay, we're going to go out there now. The weeds pick out easier when it's a little damp. So we had to go out and pick the weeds and hoe it.
And then what did you grow in the little garden?
The garden had like lettuce and cabbage, and because of course you had to make sauerkraut from your cabbage, and cucumbers and radishes, lettuce. Carrots were in there too because your carrots, my mom would pack them once in a while in a 5-gallon bucket with sand, you know, because you only had so much fridge space. So she would pack them, wash them, and pack them in a 5-gallon bucket with sand and put them down in our cellar hole, which was under the house. It was not a basement. It was just dug out there at that time in the old house. And she'd put the carrots in there and set them down in the basement or in the cellar hole. And that was cold and damp down there. So we'd eat them first, and the ones in the fridge would last a little longer than
So you had a refrigerator? Did you have electricity growing up?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Since
Okay.
1951 we had electricity
Okay.
here.
okay. Yeah.
And then was there something else that you stored in that root cellar besides carrots?
That was our storage, everything Mom canned. If she canned any kind of food, any kind of meat, that was all stored downstairs in that root cellar. Yeah, so there was...
And was that separate from the house?
It was underneath the house. I remember in the kitchen in our old house, there was a hole in the kitchen floor, and it had a cover on it. It was like a crawl space. And there was a little ring on that door, and you'd lift that ring to lift it, and there was a ladder to go down there. And that's how we had to go down. And we hated going down there because it was dirt. It was creepy.
I was gonna ask.
Horrible creepy. And we had salamanders down there. That's why it was so creepy. And they say, okay, now Donna, you go down and get up a jar of peaches. And it was like, do I have to? But that was where we stored it, because our house was not big, and so the cellar had all our canned goods. Mom would buy cases of peaches and pears and apricots, and that all got canned, and we ate that all winter long. So there was a lot of food downstairs.
And I had a question, and it totally went out of my mind. Did you water your garden?
We had barrels once in a while, but basically I don't remember watering. I mean, it had to rain when we needed water. I mean,
Yeah, we did. I mean, we
you
did.
know, because ours was never
Because
that close
there
to
isn't
the
like a
house.
crick or anything running around in this area, is
No,
there?
It was either you watered it, or if you didn't have access to get water to it, then it just kind of dried on you. You didn't have a good garden then.
So what did you do if it hailed, or if there was a drought and you didn't have a good garden? What'd you guys eat then?
You got pretty hungry.
You didn't have any, you just didn't. So you had to rely on what you had, and like he said, people, they had the geese and the goats, and they would eat all the grass. I mean, they were good weeders. They ate all that stuff. And then, of course, you'd have chickens, so you'd have your own eggs. So.
And you always had the milk cows, you lived off of that cream and eggs and milk. You had everything yourself.
Sold your eggs. That was your grocery money. You sold the cream to the creamery. That was money for maintenance and upkeep, whatever you needed in the house, or even, if you didn't need it all, then you would use it for some of the farm things you needed,
See, my folks bought this place in 1940 for $800. They had 12 milk cows and 100 laying hens, and that's how they paid this quarter land off.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? Mm-hmm. So then you had to do chores before you went to school, milking and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
What other small livestock did you have? You had cows, you had...
Pigs, always had pigs, because you'd butcher 2-3 pigs every fall.
Tell me what
in the spring.
Oh, really? You'd butcher in the spring too?
We did sometimes.
How did you store that? Like a whole pig?
In the well.
Really? Do you want to explain that? How that all worked?
It used to be 60-inch culverts or 30-inch. The big, now we don't have big well holes anymore. Well, there's always enough room to hang this meat down, or what else they wanted to store for the summer, and that kept it nice and cool.
So it kept for a long time down there?
2-3 months, yeah.
Okay, now are you talking like hams and bacon? Because that was
Oh,
cured.
okay,
That was
okay.
cured.
Yeah.
But your other meat they used to can.
Yeah, they canned a lot of the chicken.
like the chicken got canned, and the geese they would can, cut it up and put it into these half-gallon jars and can it, and that way you could store it in the root cellar.
Did you pressure can it or hot water
No, you got
bath?
a hot water bath. They used these great big boilers, and they'd be on the cook stove, and you'd get that boiling in there, and that's where you put these big jars in, because you didn't have other kettle big enough to put these half-gallon jars in. Like goose drumsticks, they're big, so you needed a bigger jar for them.
Did you like geese?
Oh, it was good. It was very good. Yeah, it was very good.
See, and then your bread, I remember my mom baking bread almost every other day. Just enough so that it would keep a couple of days. And so you basically always had fresh bread.
And where'd you get the wheat, the flour? Did you grind your own flour?
No, they bought ground flour. Cullum had a mill up there, and that's where I remember my dad going up there to get flour from that mill.
So did he buy lots of it at a time, or you guys didn't run to town every week?
No, it's not like it's today where you just jump in the vehicle and go to town 3 times a day. We were lucky to get there once a week.
Your dad and mom would buy like what, 100 or 200?
In the fall, they would stock up on sugar and flour. They usually bought about 300 pounds of flour and then 100 pounds of sugar. And that would basically take them through for a year.
Where was there a grocery store close by or a dry goods store?
In Ashley, yeah.
Do you remember the name of that?
Well, there used to be, Ashley at one time had, I believe, 6 grocery stores.
No, wait, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't buy a lot of stuff at the grocery, did you? Not food wise, you didn't buy a lot.
It was more self-preservation. You did your garden stuff and your animals, like I said, and even like getting back to the canning of the meat. If you had like butchered a beef, you would cut it into cubes and put it into jars and can it, and it would make its gravy in there then. So you had canned beef cubes too.
Yeah, sausage was more important than anything, and you canned that all the time.
Yeah, sausage was always canned.
So give me a typical like, okay, tomorrow we're gonna butcher. Then what happens? You get out of bed and you do what?
Well, first you milk the cows.
Oh,
First thing, that was
first things
That was
first.
first.
I grew up, I had to get the calves ready to feed those pale calves, And of course then you separate it, and the extra skim milk that the calves didn't eat, the pigs got. So you always had hogs on the place year round. And then when it came time to weigh 200 pounds, 220, then you would butcher. And then and I used to hate that scalding we had to do that. Oh, did I hate that, because that was very touchy. Water had to be right. You put those chains in this big trough. Then you throw that hog in, and boy, you had a turner just like that. If that wasn't done correctly, then she would get scalded too much.
See, then the skin would come off, and you just wanted it so the hair would come off, right?
And that was.
So you had one person on each side of this trough with chains, big chains in, and this guy would pull so this hog would roll over, and the one on this side would pull back so you'd flip her this way again, so you would get her rolled evenly in this barrel or trough, so that when you pulled her out, and then every once in a while when they were rolling him in there, then one guy would reach in and pull off a wad of hair to see if the hair are coming off easily, and if not, you had to keep him in this hot water until the hair would pull decent
Then
on
when
the
they were
hog.
done, you had to hang them up, so that you could go to work.
And scrape off all the hair, and then you had certain tools. I know my folks had one. It was kind of like a rounded metal dish with a handle on, and you'd use that to scrape across to scrape these hair off the hog.
See, and there was everything used. There was nothing that did not get used when they butchered these hogs.
So you wanted the hair off of there clean so you could make what they called schwademaga, which was the rinds or the skin of the hog. So that, you didn't use all that, and that got cut into little pieces and mixed in with like the parts of the jowls on the hog for schwademaga and liver sausage and
Back straps, we used to put some back straps in to make.
And you did all this in like one day? I mean, just
Pretty much so.
pretty
yeah.
much so, yeah.
processed the whole thing and got it taken. Did you make the sausage that
Make
day?
sausage too, and then it would go. One of the guys, like his dad, would take it down to his uncle's place,
He had a smokehouse, and then you'd smoke your
and
sausage.
he'd take it down there and hang it in there to smoke it. So
And then Ma would can, the next day she would can some of that and sausage that.
and that way, by
That was-
canning it, you would be able to keep it for the summer when you come home from the field and you need something quick to eat. You opened up a jar of canned sausage.
That was like the pizzas today.
Quick, yes. Fried the sausages and fried potatoes, and it was a quick meal. There you didn't run to the store like he said for a pizza. You had homemade sausage and fried potatoes, and yeah.
Okay.
Large families where there were extra kids at home, and some families didn't have enough work for all their children, so then they would send one of their girls or one of their boys over to help the neighbor out, because you had a lot of that neighborly stuff back then. Okay, so it's on hard times, send a kid over to help.
So you mentioned that you used horses growing up to work out in the field. Did you for just the haying, or did you use them for planting and harvesting? What small crops or grains did you grow growing up?
barley, oats, wheat, corn. Corn, my dad for the longest time cultivated corn with a team. That was just, that's what he had and that's how we did it.
You had
You
to
know,
plant a little further apart than they do nowadays, though.
You know,
For
so
that,
I
didn't
remember
ya?
stacking the hay with an old Jayhawk stacker is what they called it. You know, and you had a team of horses that would sweep the hay together. You know, and then they'd have to push this into this Jayhawk sweep. You know, and then there you had a tractor on the Jayhawk, and that would take that hay and lift it up and dump it on a plow. And those horses were so broke that they just knew when it was enough and start backing up. You know, that was, I mean,
They could feel the pressure on
Yeah.
there, I think, and then
You know,
they knew that it was done.
and my
so-
mother would rake hay with the team for the longest time. Well, until I was big enough to start raking hay with a tractor, then that quit.
That's cool. I think almost everybody had horses, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
So do you remember? Did you have a summer kitchen at
No,
all out at the house?
We didn't.
My grandparents did.
And what did they do in the summer kitchen? Do you remember?
They lived in there in the summer. The only thing they did in the house like here was sleep.
Why is
I
that?
don't save the house.
Not as much work to keep things neat there, because in the summer kitchen, you didn't be quite as careful, I think. You know, they'd have the stove in there.
See,
and
what
the
happened here
dishes.
is this part of the house here was when I was born and before I was born. And then in '56 we put a basement underneath the house. Well, that's where we lived, but we slept upstairs. Folks they wanted to save the upper part of the house.
Couldn't mess it
So
up.
we-
Even when we got married, I mean, this just floored me. When we got married, and I came up here, well, Delbert's mom had an electric stove up here in the kitchen, but she cooked downstairs on the cook stove all the time. The only time she used that electric stove was when she had to make an angel food cake. Because they rose so much nicer, they didn't scorch like they do in there, because the cook stove was so hot all the time, and then they would get too brown. So she used the electric stove for that angel food cake. I remember that so well, and I thought, she's got this electric range and we're cooking on a cook stove, because I didn't have to use a cook stove at home. of
Was that a
course.
kerosene cook stove,
We
or
had both.
did you say coal?
Wood or coal?
We had both.
Wood or coal. Yeah.
And so, besides kerosene, did you have to like go pick up cow pies and burn them? Did you ever
Yes.
remember
I
doing
used to
that?
have to
Yeah,
do that
he
for my
did.
grandpa Eszlinger. I was real small, and he'd have an old stone boat with a white mare on front. And that mare was so broke, you just knew when to take off, and you'd throw these
Cow chips.
cow chips
Patties.
on it. And it was hilarious.
So Coogan, do you guys make Coogan for special occasions,
Yeah.
or
I bake kuchen.
growing up? Did
If
they?
you want to gain weight, just eat Coogan.
It's got lots of cream and eggs in there and sugar, and boy, I tell you, everybody licks when they eat that.
So
I mean,
you
it's
talked about how these people started here. You know, in 1902, the first Eszlinger came 2 miles over. That's where he's homestead. He dug a hole in the ground. That first
That's where you lived.
Winter
That's
to
where
winter.
they lived.
You know, it was
And
late
then
fall
went
into
into-
winter.
winter, and then the next summer he built a sod house.
Okay, now you talk about this thing that he covered the hole with.
Well, it was just an old wagon box.
He had a wagon that
Now,
they came over
how
with,
do you
a
think
big
you
square
lived?
wagon
And he had
box.
one little boy that was 2 years old.
And they dug a hole,
And there they
Lived in
they
that
lived.
over the winter.
There were lots of them that did that.
and the box was over
You
top.
went to
and
the
that's-
lake to get water.
And what about to keep warm? It had to have been cold.
Well, I suppose they burned what they could down in there, but
Because there weren't a lot of trees out here, were
no,
there?
it was bare. So
No, that I always, well, at the Eszlinger reunions, I always have to give the history. So I give that portion of the history, you know. And I tell them it's not like today where you have four or five TVs in the house, you know, you sat in this hole.
And then is the sod house still there by any chance?
No,
And how many years did they live in that before they had a real house to live in?
no, I would imagine that the real houses first started basically in the 20s and 30s. When people started building better houses.
well, and then one of the brothers had a granary, so one family came over and they lived in the
Lived in the
granary over the
granary.
winter. Because that was a wall and a shelter, so they could live indoors rather than in the hole.
So tell me, did they build the barn first for livestock before they would build a house?
That one I can't answer, but that was definitely top priority, having a barn.
Well, yeah, because animals were kind of your livelihood,
Yes.
weren't they? And you both grew up milking?
Yes.
Yep.
That's twice a day? How many, I hear about people that have 10 kids that had, 12 cows, and so they each had one, but if you guys had such small families, did that like take you a half a day to milk and then you had to turn around and do it again?
His mom was a good hand milker. Electricity went out one time, and we had no power for the milk machine to go. So she would milk by hand. I tell you, I've never seen anybody that could milk cows as fast by hand as she could. She was just pumping them cows. She got her milk out of there. She was
Big herds, you never did mention like 12, 15 cows?
Yeah, that's basically what. Later on, when she got older, when dairies got a little bit bigger, her folks went in.
They converted to a dairy farm then. So then we milked like the most that I can remember that we milked at home was like 65, and when we had a milking parlor, of course, with a milk
This
tank.
was already in
And
the
this
60s.
was back in the 60s then.
Yeah.
So Mom and I would do all the milking during the summer months most of the time. And Dad and my brother would be out the field and doing the field work. So that was kind of the job. But then once I got older, like 15, 16, I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning to go out and milk those cows. So they were done before I left for school. So they were just about done milking, and all they had to do was run the water and pipeline, clean it up, and wash everything up. And then that way, when they came in to have breakfast, then they were ready to go out and do field work. So in the evening, when the bus dropped us off, that was the first thing they did was get up, change clothes, go out, and start milking again.
And almost every event had to be either before or after milking back then, didn't it?
Yes, yes.
All the
Or you
weddings.
Or you just
and-
didn't get to it, Or you would be late for it because, of course, you have to milk, that
And
was...
feed the chickens. My mom was in the chicken barn at 6 o'clock every morning.
Well, you said you had 100 chickens or so when they first got out here.
100.
Did you butcher chickens like
Oh, yeah.
a bunch on a day, or how did that
Mom
differ
usually
then?
butchered 2-3 a day.
Because she was alone.
Yeah, and she had about 100 roosters usually to butcher.
They were called spring chicken, you'd order them to raise just for butchering. It was always roosters, and the pullets, of course, which are the female chickens, you would keep, and they would be your next year's laying hens then. And then in the fall, you had the year-olds or the old hens, those you butchered, and those you would can and make noodle soup with all winter long.
Did you have eggs all winter long? Did they lay all winter
Yes,
long?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they always had eggs.
Did
It
you-
was a slower time when some of them would quit laying, when they, molting I think is what it's called, when they stop laying and they recycle and get new feathers and stuff. So you don't have as many eggs during that time, but you still would have a few that would lay, so you'd have enough eggs to use.
How about making sauerkraut? You'd mentioned sauerkraut earlier, but we
did it in a
didn't.
crock.
And can you kind of tell us how you
My
did
mom
that?
would have one of those great big kraut shredders. It was a rectangular shaped thing, and then there was like a box on top, and you'd put your head of cabbage in, and you'd slide this thing across all the time. There was a blade on the bottom, and that would shred it, so it was evenly cut. And then you would pack it into a crock, and Mom would put some in and layer salt on, and put some more in and layer more salt on, and keep pressing down and packing it. And then when she was done filling this crock up, it was maybe 5, 10, 15-gallon crock, I don't remember the size. Then she would have like a nice clean piece of board, like a 2x4 or whatever would fit in there. It was wider than 2x4, that would fit into this crock. And then she'd have a clean rock, that she washed and scoured, and that rock she'd lay on top of there for pressure to press down. And she'd tie a dish towel across it so nothing would drop in, and then that had to ferment. And then when it was done fermenting, then she would put it into jars and put it in her dirt cellar.
Okay, then how did you eat it? What did you eat it with? Did you fry it?
Well, if you butchered your own hogs, you had ham. So you'd have ham and sauerkraut. Spare ribs, pork ribs, you'd make that, and that's when she'd make that. Then we'd also have dumplings or strudels with it. Or you'd have, sometimes they'd be a treat, they'd buy wieners and sauerkraut. So you'd have wieners and sauerkraut with mashed potatoes. And sauerkraut was just something you ate that with many, many meals. Yeah. It was,
So how about, do you remember anything about like how they kept things cold before they had electricity? Like ice, or where'd you get ice from, or is that like just way too far away, or didn't they maybe? Because people that live closer to the river went out and harvested
Right. They
ice,
would
but you guys
cut
are
it
kind
out
of
of there.
landlocked down here, aren't you?
The only thing that I remember is, that to keep things cool, they had to use the well.
How deep do you think that well was?
Oh, 30 feet at the most.
And it was all like by rope? You let it down and let it up again? How about celebrations like 4th of July, or what, is there anything in particular that you guys got food-wise that you never got normally for 4th of July, Christmas, Easter? Is there something special that you guys did or ate for those
At
holidays?
Christmas time, we always had helva.
Can you tell me what that is?
It's like a candy, I think.
It's a candy, some
It's
form of
made
a
with,
candy.
I think it's made out of sesame, if I'm right.
And where did that,
That's a German tradition.
I mean, I don't know where it originated
Yeah.
from. I know they sell it here at the grocery store. And it is very sweet, very rich. But
You don't find
is
it in a
good.
lot of stores, but
Yeah.
I mean,
and that was a Christmas time thing?
Yeah, we
because
always
it,
had
because
that
it was
at
kind of
Christmas, yeah.
expensive, so you didn't buy. It was a treat to have it at Christmas time. Yeah, that was something that you just didn't buy like every day when you went to the store because it was spendy, very spendy.
Well, that's about the only thing I did. I know this winter I made the comment when we opened our gifts, because we got 3 kids and 7 grandkids, so it gets kind of full with gifts, and I kind of looked at one of my daughters and I said, man, oh, living, this is just unreal, because I grew up, you didn't get a gift. There was not such thing.
Yeah,
I mean, you
It-
just wasn't
there
there.
wasn't this
And
giving,
you would
giving.
not spend money for Christmas like they do today.
And we have tailored back so much. I mean, we have this fun thing where everybody has to go to a second-hand store or a rummage sale, and that's what you buy for somebody. That's where your gift comes from.
They were, that's good German recycling, right?
Well,
That's
it
something
is.
we've been doing for decades.
We've done it for a long time, and it used to be, well, you have to go buy a new gift. Well, everybody's got everything, so they decided we have more fun doing this. So, I mean, he got the neatest Lair T-shirt last year for Christmas, and it was from way back when. And when the kids come home, he makes sure he wears it so they know he's enjoying it.
So did you guys go on any picnics or anything growing up?
4th of July, I
Maybe.
remember I had an uncle and an aunt, and they only had one daughter. And they had this nice shelter belt just a little ways away from their farm. So they would invite my mom and dad and us and another uncle of mine. And we would just go in this shelter belt, and it was a little empty space in the middle. We'd have a fire, we'd roast hot dogs, and we'd spend the whole day back in that shelter belt. And it was cool in there, it was nice, it was just a fun day. Then we'd play softball. You always had a ball game. I mean, and everybody played ball, from the moms to the dads to all the kids. And it was just a fun time that you did everything together, because you didn't go away a lot back then.
There weren't very many days off, were
No,
there?
you didn't. I mean, so the 4th of July was a special day, and then the big thing there was you had this big watermelon feed and ice cream. That was what everybody enjoyed, was the ice cream. Yeah.
Do you remember making homemade ice cream a lot?
Oh, absolutely. We did. We had the hand crank, where you have to crank it. Then my dad would go out and chop ice out of the cow tank, because we had the big wooden cow tank, and he'd chop ice out of there all the time. And chop it up, he'd put it in a gunny sack, and he'd take the hammer and smash it up. And we'd make homemade ice cream.
In the winter, I'm assuming, because
Yes.
July there wouldn't
Yeah,
be any
there was
ice
no
on the cow
It
tank.
was a winter thing. Yeah, it was a winter thing. And we'd have it like for holidays, or if there was a birthday, we'd have homemade ice cream.
Everybody got a cake for their birthday too?
I didn't.
No, not so much. It was just another treat or something, It was not something that you had a lot of,
How about like homemade root beer or wine, or like what kind of things?
My Grandpa Meyer made wine, choke cherry wine. It was so good. And they had it in the basement. It was so funny. They lived in Forbes in this little old house, and you had to go down the stairs, and right under the stairwell he had this barrel. It was like a wooden barrel with a little spigot on. And us, my cousins and I, we'd love going down there. And we found a glass, because of course they couldn't leave glasses around. I suppose they knew what we were planning to do. So there we found this little juice glass, and we'd all have a snort of this wine down there. And of course when we get up, I'm sure they smelled it on us kids. So after that, they didn't let us go down to play anymore because they knew we were only going down because of the wine. But that choke cherry wine was just awesome. I can still remember how it tasted. But
By the barrel, though.
he made
by
it was a barrel, like maybe I don't know how big that would have been, 10-gallon barrel, I think.
Wow.
And I think it was specifically made for wine.
I wonder if some of them weren't like 15 or
Or what? I mean, it was
gallon, because
it was
some
kind
of
of
them
like a
were-
wine barrel, a nice
some
round
of the
barrel.
old timers around here they called it, they burned whiskey, is what they called it. They made their own whiskey.
They did. That wasn't the
Bootlegging,
yeah, or
Is
the
that what-
distilling.
No,
Did
some of
they?
it probably
Some of
was
it-
licking, but
you know. I
see, then there used to be barn dances all over the country here. That's what.
Saturday nights mostly,
yeah.
because that was probably the only. Everybody kind of worked 6
Yeah,
days
it was
a
always
week,
a Saturday
right?
night thing. Yeah, I know my mom and my aunt always talked about, they had one just a little ways south of their place, and of course their girls didn't have a car and you didn't go by yourself unless you were escorted by somebody. And they had an older neighbor boy, and he was like a brother to them, and he would come and pick them up and they'd all go to the barn dance together.
My mom won't tell me what they did at those barn dances, so I'm only
They were supposed to be
assuming.
dancing, I think.
But yes,
I can tell you what happened there because my uncles used to tell me that stuff.
But I don't know that we should put that into a
Oh.
video.
go on. So how about pickled? You know, we talked about. Did you pickle watermelon?
Yes, they put them in a barrel too.
Okay, and
I-
were they
It
special?
was a
kind
special pickling melon. That's one thing they grew on this Bastan. They were not the big watermelons we get at the store now. They were the small green ones, and they never got real big. And they would put them in a barrel, and there they would have like would that be like a 50-gallon barrel? It was a big
About
wood,
30, I'd say.
30
Yeah,
like a
about
big
30,
wooden
yeah.
barrel, and it would have a lid on it too then, of course. And they would put them in there, and they put a whole bunch of dill in the bottom, garlic and pickling spices, all this stuff in this barrel, and they'd pack these watermelon in and pour this brine over top. And there too, again, they'd put a board on top to keep it down so they'd all be in this brine. And they were in there like all winter. I mean, they ate on them all winter long. I mean, they had this big barrel or sometimes 2 barrels full, because that was something that you ate with your meals. I mean, that was a treat, like, I don't know, I mean, it was like a pickle, but they were pickled, and you would cut one open and pick the rind off, and that was served with many, many meals.
and meals were basically dough. Did you guys eat a lot of?
Yeah, a lot of dumpling, a lot of broodkichle, which was bread dough that you would fry, deep fry, fat fry, kind of like what do they call it, a walking taco or a,
And what did you eat them with? I mean, we didn't eat lettuce and taco meat on.
well, we just put jelly on it. My mom one time, and this was interesting, she made plum jelly, and it got too thick. You know, you had all these homegrown plums, and it got really thick. You couldn't get it out of the jar. And because pectin or whatever, I don't know, it just didn't turn out right. But you didn't throw it away. And that was so thick, when we had those broodkichle, you would take a spoon of this, put it on there, because they were hot, and that would melt on there. So the jelly didn't go to waste. You ate that plum jelly when we had broodkichle.
Choke cherries? Did you guys use choke cherries?
We had to pick them. That made jelly. Yeah. And rhubarb jam. What else?
We had rumley cake. Plenty of that.
And that is
That is a good question. I don't remember what.
Made
But
out
my
of
mom
what?
made that all the time. Was Dad loved that rumley cake, and so we had.
Oh, I don't remember that. Maybe that was just a name they gave it. It was like, oh,
And did you eat dumplings on bread baking day?
yes. When my mom would make bread dough, then she'd put so much away and make dumplings, because that was always a day we had.
And what did you eat
Cream.
those with? Oh, cream?
Oh,
Cream chicken.
dumplings and cream chicken.
Or else
oh.
you'd have the pork ribs, and there was a good juice with stewed potatoes, and you would use that for dunking your dumplings in.
And nifla, did you guys make that? Or
Lots of
because
nifla.
okay.
Lots of nifla.
'Cause
Nifla
they're-
soup.
Cream and eggs were probably and bread the prime
Yeah.
meal all the time.
But the nifla, they would be fried up, and you'd have them with either nifla and ham or nifla and sausage, or just with just about anything. Or else you'd cook the potatoes and nipfla together, and you'd put sauerkraut in with that, and then it would be like a hot dish type thing. And then of course you'd have your meat on the side.
So that's basically what you guys ate, like not three meals a day, but
Yeah, I mean, basically that's
Couple of times a
what we
week,
lived
maybe?
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, how about like during harvest? Did you eat out in the field at all, or did you eat more than your breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
You would take lunch out mid-afternoon before the evening meal if they were going to work late because of weather conditions or wanting to get done. So then you would take maybe sandwiches out, or you'd...
We only did that during combine.
Yeah.
Other than that, we didn't do it.
I mean, basically, we would have... Because Mom and I had a milk, of course, so then when we were done milking, then they'd come home to eat.
So can you tell me why they fed the skim milk to the animals?
They would not throw anything
So we
away.
didn't throw it away.
You would not waste anything like that. That's why they kept hogs for that skim milk.
See, the calves
no.
got so much milk, but you didn't have that many, and you could only give them so much milk. But the hogs, I mean, then you'd have like a barley or oats, usually it was barley, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd pour that in there to ferment, and they'd eat that. I mean, that was, when they say slop the hogs, there was barley mixed with skim milk, and that would stink, it was sour. But the hogs loved it, and did they grow on that?
Oh yeah, that was
Oh,
good
they
eating.
loved that stuff. That was good to them, yeah. I mean, one thing when we milked before, when I got married, we milked some cows here, and we separated, and separates the cream from the milk. So then I would have some people in town that would buy cream from me, and I would make cottage cheese out of the skim milk, because we didn't have hogs at that time anymore. So I would fill 2 canners with this milk, and when it was hot in summer, like when it gets hot now, that would be in a day's time that milk was sour, so then you could make cottage cheese. And I would make cottage cheese, lots of it, and put it in pound packages. And I had a guy from Eureka that used to come up, and he'd buy like 80 pounds at a crack. And I think he probably went and resold it for more than he bought it from me, but it was money for me as well, because...
Yeah, he would have bought more if he would have had more.
when we were talking about canning meat, what they did to preserve it, they made something called pastrami, which is like pastrami in English, I think, or it's jerky, basically. But it was called pastrami. And they would take strips of like roast beef, and cut it into strips, or they would use goose thighs or breasts on the goose, and that too was salted, seasoned with we would call it a marinade, but it was put into a crock, and brine was poured over it, and then they would leave it in there 3-4 days, and then it was smoked. And that was like a smoked goose breasts or goose thighs or the beef strips, and that was more or less like dried. Then it was smoked, so it was still chewy but not dry and hard. And that that was one way of saving those things, because they had enough salt in them, so they didn't spoil. And then they a lot of times freeze them, and that was something that they ate a lot on, because the people would have a lot of geese, that was their way of surviving.
Geese because they were easy to raise, or
They didn't eat a lot. They ate
Didn't, a duck needs like barley and corn to get fat. A goose
geese
doesn't
eat
need
grass.
that.
If you have weeds, anything
Yeah.
on the yard, they would eat everything,
Yeah.
down to nothing. They eat every grass.
Interesting.
They were
See,
grazers. They
Goats
ate
were
one.
the same thing. That
Yeah.
was a cheap
Cheap
supply
animals.
of meat.
Yeah, and they didn't take a lot of maintenance.
See, my dad always told me the story of when they were kids, they had a pail that they hung down into the well to pull the water up. Well, then their goats, which how goats are, they very
They're curious.
Well, they would look down and they would see
This reflection.
his reflection. So they would jump down, and then him and his brother always had to pull that doggone goat off with that water pail. He used to hate that. How
that didn't hurt them to.
Oh,
No.
they are real flexible. They are horrible little buggers, but just funny.
Okay, now you mentioned a word in German that was, or what was the word she said? What did you just? It was just a minute ago.
Escaped me. Old age is kicking in. What the heck did I say?
I could tell you a lot of things in German.
But and I can't remember what it had to do with anything now. Except that you said it, and I said, just wait while I turn the
Yes,
camera
I
on.
remember it. That's what you said. Well, anyway, in the meantime, also we talked about baking bread, and they used what they called everlasting yeast. Ewige Satz, it was called. And that means yeast, which ewig means forever. And that would be made, you would boil a couple of potatoes in like a quart of water until they were real soft. Then you mash them up, and then you add it like 2 tablespoons sugar and a tablespoon of salt. And back then you got yeast in little cubes. It was a yeast cube. And you would put a yeast cube or 2 into this when it was cooled down, of course. And that you would let set then, and you'd let it set overnight. And the next day, then you would use all of this stuff. This was your base to start your bread dough with. And you use that, except you took 1 pint away that you would put into a pint jar and store that in your cellar, because that would last or keep until the next 3 days, 4 days later when you bake bread again. And this Ewige Satz, which is everlasting yeast, is a continuation, because you couldn't buy a lot of yeast all the time and it was expensive. So then you would use this everlasting yeast, and then when you'd have this pint jar, the next day when you were baking bread, you would cook again 2 more potatoes in a quart of water, or 3 potatoes, and add your sugar a little bit and put this in with it. And then let it set overnight so that this can all kind of ferment. And then you take a pint away again from that. That was always your starter yeast. So you would always have the continuation. And if you ran out or didn't have any, then you would borrow some from your neighbor lady until you had something, you'd give it back to her.
That's good, you know, because I've heard people talk about, but you're the first person that's ever been able to tell me how they did that.
Yeah.
You know, everybody remembers that, but they didn't remember
And
how to
I
make
do
it
remember
grow.
my mom making, I had to go down the cellar, of course, and get this yeast stuff from my mom because it was stored down there, you know.
And what did you do with those salamanders when you found them? Did you step on them?
No. You know, because it was just a cold hole down there, and they just totally freaked me out because you never knew where they were going to be, and all of a sudden you'd see them crawling.
I haven't seen one since I was 8 or 9 years old.
But I mean, how they got down there in these holes, and there'd be holes in the wall, in the dirt wall, you know, because that was just shoveled out with a shovel or however they dug that at one time. And so there would be holes in the wall, and I kept thinking they're salamanders, that's where they came out of. So I was never so glad when we got rid of that old house and built a new one, so I didn't have to go down that stupid crawl space and visit them salamanders. It just was not good.
Okay, stories. Give me a good old story. Can you think of anything that we haven't talked about?
Talking about your uncle, Sinderschuld. That's what I was going to say. Remember, his uncle had this belief that if something bad happened and something was going wrong or a hailstorm came through, his uncle would always say, this is Sinderschuld. In other words, you obviously sinned, so that's God's getting even with you, or God's punishing you for something.
Spank you for that.
Yeah, you know, that was Sinderschuld. And he always, and as, you know, and he was just a funny man. And even after he passed away, every once in a while, Delbert will say, yeah, his Uncle Jake would have said this, or his Uncle Jake would have said that, because he had the funniest sayings. I mean, he was just a hilarious man.
So you came from a funny German family then?
I think so, yeah. I think we're all a little funny.
But some are grumpier about it than others.
I think we have a good sense of humor about a lot of things, you know. And you can laugh at it rather than sit and dwell on bad things, because that gets you no place. So, yeah.
And work makes life sweet. Did they ever say that to you?
Oh, yeah.
Can you say that for me?
Arbeit macht das Leben süß.
See, it's so long, and work makes life sweet is only 3 words, so what am I missing in the translation there?
Well, it's all the same thing. Arbeit means work, and macht das Leben makes your life süß is sweet.
Thank you. I need to know these things.
Oh, yeah.
And do you know kind of what they were getting at when they said that? I mean, did they just, like, when you complained about working, did they say that to you?
Somebody might complain about working, so then when you'd complain, they say, well, work keeps you out of, you know, working keeps you out of trouble, so it makes your life better.
Anything else that they would repeatedly tell you? Because it's just amazing to me, some of the stuff that I didn't know about my parents and grandparents growing up.
What did you say about your mom last night when we were driving to check the cows? You said something about your mother.
I don't remember, but I remember the the older people. Somebody was lazy. That was bad. I mean,
They really
that time
frowned
you
on
have
that.
to do something, because if you were lazy, they didn't really like you too well. There was not only
Well,
one guy.
because
That was
times were tough and everybody had to pull their weight. And so being lazy was not looked upon very well in those days, and I guess for a good reason.
And how about on Sundays? Like, were you allowed to do anything on Sundays? Cooking, needlework? What? How did you?
Delbert's mom always said you were not even allowed to cut paper on Sundays. You could not use a scissor to cut anything Sundays. I mean, that was a no-no. Yeah, I mean, just you couldn't do that.
I would ride horse on Sunday. Usually, that was my entertainment.
Did you visit on Sundays? Like, go visit?
Yeah,
on Sundays?
usually. Sometimes you did, yeah.
Yeah,
But always church, right?
church was first. Church was first. And then of course you'd come home and you'd have homemade chicken noodle soup with homemade noodles and the
Tuna
chicken.
sandwiches.
Or sandwiches with your soup, yes. But I know my mom or my grandma, they would butcher a chicken on Saturday. And that's what you had Sunday. They'd fry that up and you'd have the noodle soup and fried chicken. That was just a Sunday meal all the time.
And did you both go to school?
Yes, high school here in Ashley.
Oh, okay. Country school at all, or?
Country school, I went until I was in the 4th grade. And then after that, they started bus service. And, yeah.
I started 8th grade in town, and that was a big
A hard
switch,
change,
boy.
a hard change.
From 7 students to 200 and some students.
Yeah.
Did you both speak German?
Ganz
Growing up?
gut Deutsch, ich kann so gut Deutsch sprechen wie Englisch.
Yeah.
And they didn't. Did you get like harassed?
Kids got punished and.
I did
even in
not know
farm
English
school.
when I started 1st grade in school, because my grandpa Eszlinger said this guy is going to learn German. So that's what they taught me. Well, then I got a little bit into trouble because I wasn't supposed to speak German in school. So that took some doings to
I know
get into
some,
the English version of
some
saying
of the
things in English.
teachers would make the kids stand in the corner then because they would speak German. You know, because you're supposed to talk English, but if you talk German the whole time as growing up, you know, how are you supposed to know the English when you got there? I mean,